Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug speaks with distinguished legal professionals who have mastered the intricacies of building a successful law practice and then transitioning to retirement or other fulfilling pursuits when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
Today's guest is Mark Shaiken, a lawyer turned author whose career arc bridges our entire Dusk to Dawn theme vividly and brings it to life. For nearly 4 decades, Mark practiced bankruptcy and commercial law, building deep expertise and a professional identity in both the boardroom and in the courtroom. Then, as many lawyers find themselves asking, what comes next, he made a dramatic shift. He left the law and turned his attention to storytelling, both in photography and in writing legal thrillers and memoir-style reflections that draw on his rich legal expertise. Mark is the author of the award-winning 3J legal thriller series, including Fresh Start, Automatic Stay, Unfair Discrimination, and Cram Down. He also wrote the reflective book, It's What Makes Me, Me, which chronicles his journey before, during, and after his 41-year legal career. Practicing primarily in commercial bankruptcy law across multiple states, Mark's switch to writing allowed him to explore the same complexity, motives, and systems he once navigated from the inside. In our conversation today, we'll explore how Mark built his legal career, the discipline, strategy, and structure of practice, and how he transitioned into the creative world of photography and novels, weaving legal insight into plot, character, and theme. We'll talk about what it means for lawyers to repurpose their skills, redefine success, and tell new stories after the practice fades. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, one of the things I love talking to my guests about is how they got into this profession in the first place. You know, what they were drinking or smoking at the time, and how they ultimately decided to become lawyers. And in that context, you know, what was compelling in your nearly 4 decades of practicing law that kept your drive alive?
Yeah, I think my path may have been a little different than some of the lawyers that I certainly came in contact with during my career. I think I was home over fall break from college, my junior year, and my dad, so I was 20, and my dad took me aside and asked what I had in store for the rest of my life. And I hadn't really thought much about the rest of my life, portion of my life. And so I told him I needed some time to think about it. And I came back and I gave him a plan A and a plan B. Plan A was I would run around the country and follow the Mets or the Yankees and take pictures for the New York Times or the Daily News. And plan B was that I'd take some time off after college and I'd write the not so great American novel. He took maybe 3 seconds to say that those were not going to happen. And I think he was concerned about his investment in me at that point. And so he sent me back to my corner and come up with something else, and I didn't. So I ended up graduating, from college the next year with no plan, and took a year off, but I didn't write the great American novel. I drove a forklift, not very well. I painted lines on the state highways in Connecticut. Mine were the not straight ones. I was an office boy. I worked for someone who fixed septic tanks. That was probably not a job to provide much more description. And finally, I capitulated would probably be the correct word, and I took the LSATs and went off to law. I got married and then went off to law school, and went to law school out in Topeka, Kansas, because my new wife had gotten into Kansas State University's veterinary school. So I moved off the East Coast and went to law school, and that was my path into law school. But I had the same problem in law school. I didn't tell my dad this. I was just really there for 3 more years, so I'd have more time to figure out what I was really going to do with my life. And senior year, I'm old enough that back in the day they put up a 3x5 or a 5x7 card on the bulletin board with a thumbtack, and it was a job opening to clerk for one of the bankruptcy judges in the District of Kansas. And I applied, and by a miracle, he took me. I had not taken bankruptcy, and the class was closed, and so I had to go beg the dean to let me take the class. And bankruptcy was another one of those parts of my life or my career that I kind of backed into it. I had no idea that I would be a bankruptcy lawyer or work for a bankruptcy judge or take the bankruptcy class. All of those things were not really on the table. But the judge was great. He was probably the most impactful person in my professional life. And, 40 plus years later, I was still doing it.
I have to encourage the viewers and listeners to get a copy of your book, What Makes Me Me, because that early part of the story you talked about is absolutely hilarious. And you tell it so well in that book about the bouncing around and doing odd jobs, like with crazy stuff that you were doing at the time, and then stumbling, as it were, in putting it in that way into law school, and then finding something there, getting a little stroke of luck with the bankruptcy judge, and then moving on to a decades long career of great success. And it's funny how I find a lot of the lawyers I interview are sort of stumble into the profession like you and I
Right.
did.
Right.
It's not this the grand plan is never really quite what it is. Many of us like me, and I suspect you, took the LSAT because why not take the LSAT? And
Right.
that sort of was that first sort of taste of it. And it's kind of like the bait and switch. They bait you in with a nice LSAT score, and then they switch you off to trying to, become a lawyer, and that whole grind that occurs after that. But I do encourage my listeners and viewers to, because it's a great book, as all your books I'm sure are, but that book in particular, I love the memoir books because it tells so much about a
Yeah.
person's
Thank you.
personality and their
Thank you.
growth. What in the practice of bankruptcy law, in the complexities of that? I mean, it's obviously a very complex area of the law with accounting issues and tax issues and all sorts of other issues going on, and also personal issues, people being profoundly affected through the process. How did you emotionally go through that as a person, and distance yourself from the emotional to the technical legal side? What was that like for you?
Well, clerking for the judge, you got a little bit of everything. The personal bankruptcies, the corporate bankruptcies, and we were in the Farm Belt, so we also had a pretty large docket of farm bankruptcies during a time when prices were low and real estate prices were even lower, and farmers were defaulting, on large large mortgage loans that had been in their family for decades and had been part of the bank's family for decades. So it was a busy practice from the judge's team's side. And then, yeah, it was 1983 that I was starting to apply for jobs as I was finishing the clerkship, and the oil industry was collapsing. And we'd had a couple of oil and gas cases, but I was hardly an oil and gas expert at all. And I began to get cold calls, from law firms in Houston, who were just looking through the records to see who was a bankruptcy clerk wherever they might be a clerk in the country, figuring that they probably knew the bankruptcy code better than a first year associate coming right out of law school, and then were making me offers without ever seeing me. This is before Zoom. And I ended up going to Houston, and I practiced there for 4.5 plus years during the demise of the oil industry. And that really thrust me into one particular part of all the financial stuff and kept me a little bit removed from the personal side, meaning no Chapter 13 repayment plans for consumers, no Chapter 7s for consumers, that kind of thing. It was a very heavy oil and gas practice that I fell into again accidentally. Certainly had never been in Texas before, and I did not hold a Texas license until after, I got hired, and I ended up taking the bar down there. Um, but that, I kind of peaked early in my career, I've said, because the size of those cases, the complexity, the fact that, here I am, barely 30 years old, and I'm working on the Hunt Brothers bankruptcy case, and, going to Dallas 3 days a week for 2 years to do that, and had a lot of autonomy in the firm because I was the only bankruptcy lawyer in that office,
Hmm.
in that firm's office. So um, it was fascinating, and it sort of just got more and more fascinating and better as the time went on.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about, precipitous moments. When I graduated from law school, I went and got an LLM in trade regulation, which is
Mhm.
intellectual property for all intents and purposes, from NYU, and I got my degree in 1977. And in 1978, a complete overhaul of the Copyright Act was coming into effect on January 1st, 1978. So in a similar way, law firms were searching for kids coming out of law schools that had IP as their background because they didn't know what to do. They had this
Right,
brand new act that they had to figure out. So I managed to get a position at a law firm largely because there was a new copyright act coming out and they needed somebody who knew about it. So,
right.
it's again, it's those sort of precipitous moments in legal careers that always fascinate me about how you progress through reaction as
Right.
opposed to, necessarily plotting it all out as it might be. So so you left Houston and then came back. You came back to Tulsa,
Philly.
right?
I left. We left Houston because my wife had gotten into the residency program for veterinarians at Penn at University of
Okay,
Pennsylvania,
okay.
and that was a hard one to turn down. Um, so off we went to Philadelphia, where we had met in college outside Philadelphia, and I thought we were going to be there then for the balance of our married life. But on the second, so that was really our second tour of duty in Philly, and she didn't like it. So we have to be someplace we could both say that we like being, otherwise it'll be disastrous. So on the other hand, you can't keep moving around the country as a lawyer, and because if you're doing it, in less than 5 year increments, you're going to be taking a lot of bar exams. So I mean, I took the Kansas, the Missouri, the Texas, and now the Pennsylvania bar exam. And
Hmm.
I said to her, we have one more move. I can't keep doing this. And we ended up in Kansas City for the balance of my career at a great firm, and in a city that had a large enough base of commerce to support a bankruptcy practice.
So after having done that and had great success in that field, tell me a little bit about how you built your practice to the size that it was when you
Yeah.
ultimately decided to leave.
So bankruptcy is an interesting practice to sort of talk about that because if you're on the debtor side, the borrower side, you really can't run around and set up lunches and go ask somebody, are you ready to go under? It just doesn't sell very well. And so yeah, a ton of it is referral practice that you sit in your office and try to build a reputation in the community. And that would be amongst the lawyers. Including lawyers way far outside of the metropolitan area in Kansas City. So, if I'm going to have an oil and gas practice of some sort in Kansas City, most of the oil and gas that would be in the area would be in Southwest Kansas or Northwest Oklahoma. And that's like a 7 hour drive from Kansas City. It's a big state. So you just have to sort of get out into the community and get your name out there, which is a little different way of getting practice. A very referral oriented practice, I guess, is what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
so you're meeting lawyers and saying your firm doesn't seem to have a bankruptcy lawyer. If any of your clients ever need bankruptcy help, I'd love it. If you would think of me, and doing it that way. And eventually, you can build enough of a reputation that you can start, approaching banks and who clearly are a target for bankruptcy work. And it turned out that most of the bankers in the Midwest were really very happy to have someone take them out to lunch and talk about their practice and how they might work with the bank and things like that. So by the end, when I started off in Kansas City, it was pretty much of a debtor-oriented practice. And the building of the practice became a creditor-oriented practice for a good chunk of my career. And then at the end, I went back to debtor work because it's more fun, I thought. And it went back to the referral thing.
So so you did that for decades,
Yes.
and at some point you decided I'd had enough. I'd like to hear your thoughts on why you felt you'd had enough, and
Yeah,
then how you transitioned. Why writing? Why photography? Because you talked about it a little earlier. Those were your plan A and B back in
right.
the day, and how did that whole process occur?
Well, the photography part was interesting because I've been taking pictures since I was 12, and I really fell into the idea of loving to take sports pictures, which is where the Mets and the Yankees came in when my dad was pressing me for an answer. When I got to Kansas City, um, I guess you could say I had a serial number of midlife crises about whether I really wanted to continue to be a lawyer or move on to do something else. And I had a hard time identifying what that something else would be. Um, the common theme of a photographer and an author is the old joke of what's the difference between a pizza and a photographer or a pizza and an author? And the answer is the pizza feeds a family of four, and, and the author and the photographer not so much. So what I ended up doing was I began taking pictures again for collegiate athletics. Kansas City was a big place for tournaments to come, basketball in particular. And out of town schools would, have me go take pictures for them, which meant that on a tournament day, the managing partner might see me in my schlocky, torn up jeans and a big backpack of camera gear going out of the office at noon. Um, so I was a little bit of an anomaly at the firm in that I had this question that I was always asked, are you a photographer who tries cases or a lawyer who takes pictures? And I was a little of both. I never really thought I would be a lawyer for decades. So I guess the fairest way to answer that is to say that I don't think I ever stopped thinking about what else I might do. And for me, that wasn't unhealthy. Um, it might probably drove my family crazy, but it for me, it 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 was a way to keep dreaming about things I might do. And as you get older, your dreams contract. You realize, okay, I've stopped growing. I'm probably not going to be 7 feet tall and playing for the Denver Nuggets as their backup center. And so you lose dreams along the way that aren't practical. But writing seemed practical. Lawyering, if there's such a verb, is one of the greatest ways to be trained as a writer. Every lawyer in every practice area has one thing in common. They write and they write constantly. And to do that, you really learn how to write and edit and be a precise, hopefully people think that my writing is precise, be a precise writer. So it was a good training ground for that moment when I finally decided, okay, it's kind of now or never.
So, so when you made that transition, what was the biggest challenge you had in doing it?
There were ones that I knew that I'd have, and then ones that I didn't realize I would have. So the ones that I knew that I would have is, not being a lawyer anymore. The discipline of, putting on my suit and tie and going to court, 3 days a week was gone, and it was gone instantly. It wasn't like a slow transition out. It was one week I'm doing that, and then the next week I'm hugging my secretary and going down the elevator for the last time. And that was a big change. The all of a sudden I have all of this time on my hands. Am I going to be disciplined enough to do what I said I was going to do? And I wasn't. So one of the things I didn't expect was this feeling of euphoria that I write about in the book. You know, I jokingly told my wife that if the guys that escaped from Alcatraz really did escape, imagine how euphoric they must have felt when they hit San Francisco and managed to float from the Alcatraz Island to the banks of San Francisco, and how they must be looking over their shoulder constantly for that marshal who's about to come and arrest them. And I felt euphoric as they would have, I expect, which is an interesting emotion because I didn't have a lot of euphoria as a lawyer. I had ups and downs, but not this kind of up. And not even when I made partner at the firm, it just, didn't have that effect. But euphoria is an interesting emotion because it gets in the way of doing anything you really want to do. You get up in the morning and you feel so damn good that you say, "Oh, I can do all that tomorrow," and tomorrow becomes next week or next month. But when the euphoria wore off, I did sit down and was very disciplined again about writing and wondering, well, would I really like it or not? Because I'd always said I wanted to do it, but I never did it, so I didn't know. Turned out I loved it, and the method that I used to write, I still use because it works for me, and I
So,
still love it. Yeah.
so when you finally sat down and decided to write your first book, how did you come about inventing this character, this protagonist, and the name 3J?
Yeah. So So Jillian, her middle name, the character's name is Josephina Jillian Jones, and her father always called her Joe, which makes sense. But everybody else, all of her friends, just called her 3J, and that's the name that stuck. So there's pieces of it. My best friend in high school's name was Jones, so that's where the last name came from. Um, and he's lost in the ether. I haven't seen him in 40 years. It'd be great if he saw this and popped up and emailed me. Jillian was the name we were going to give our kid if he turned out to be a girl when he was born, but he wasn't, so we didn't get to use that name. And I don't know where Josephina came from. I really don't. But I guess I felt like I needed another J, and that's just the one that popped into my head, and then it kind of stuck. Yeah.
So your books, as she's the protagonist who's a bankruptcy lawyer, and
She
your
is
book,
a bankruptcy lawyer in a large Kansas City firm, high atop downtown Kansas City,
yeah.
in the same building there where my firm was, on the same floor where the bankruptcy lawyers were located, because you write what you know, appearing in the same, courts that I appeared in.
So what made you choose a woman?
Another really good question. And she's a black woman, and I'm obviously neither a black person or a woman. But m my world growing up and my world through high school and college and law school was not a world of just, white people and not just men. And I decided, intentionally decided that if I ever did turn to writing a book or a series, I'd want the main character to be something other than what I look like, because the world around me are people that don't look like me. And I thought that was important. And I thought it was even more important as I went through the whole firm thing, because for decades, our law firm, many law firms, were just mainly a firm of white men. And it was only a recent thing where women started to predominate, going to law school to where there are more women going than men. And our firm was a very homogenous looking, firm of white people. And then it changed. And there were people of color that were coming in, and which was great, and women, which was great. And having, difficulty moving through the firm's process to get to be partner. It's as if the firm was letting these folks come in and then didn't know what to do with them. They assumed that they would be just like every other white man in the firm, and
Yeah.
they weren't. There were other challenges. And I saw all this. I'm not saying that I know what it felt like to be a woman and hit the glass ceiling, or to be a black person whose application is turned down, maybe because they were black. Uh, but I felt like the book should reflect what I see as how my life was, and also how I see the country. It's not a country of white men. And I felt like I could do that without violating well, how would you know how a black person would feel in that context? So it's a
You,
little bit of a tightrope, but I think I can walk it.
yeah, you definitely have. I mean, the books are great, but yeah, I think of myself in one sense that my first novel that I wrote was about the first female president of the United States and her journey as a
Mhm.
series. And I remember someone saying to me, similar to what you just said a little earlier, "Who are you to write about a woman?"
Right. Right.
I mean, you're not a woman, obviously, and whatever. I said, "Yeah, but I've got ideas and whatever." And my best editor was my wife, because I would give her copies of the manuscript and she'd go, "She can't weigh that much. She can't do this." I mean, she'd correct me so that I'd have a better sense of it as I grew as a writer. But you're right. It's a lot more challenging, but it's also a lot more satisfying to take on something that, yeah, a little unfamiliar, but you're comfortable with, and you want to challenge yourself. And that's what I found really interesting in your 3J series with the black woman bankruptcy lawyer, and encountering, and the nuances you could put in the books that are different than what you experienced yourself, which is really a great sort of narrative of the reality of being a lawyer in Kansas City, and or anywhere for that matter.
And
But it was great stuff.
I think it gives me the chance to use a legal thriller to say something relevant about a social issue or five. So I mean, so I can address aging, I can address hate, I can address redlining, the process of a bank drawing literally a red line around a neighborhood and saying we don't give mortgages in that neighborhood to people of color, which is illegal, but it was a very popular way of implementing segregation from the 20s
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
some banks still doing it. So to today, through to today, and it gives me a chance. It opens up an easy window to have the books address something that's happening, that's important. The newest book, which will be out in hopefully January or February, um, is all about deep fake videos and a fascinating thing that's going on right now in the world, that you can't tell what's real and what's not, or what's true and what's false anymore. If you don't like something somebody said, you just scream fake news and you move on to the next topic. Um, but it's very, very relevant, very pertinent, and can be kind of interesting. Hopefully, people find it interesting in the new book.
What's the title of the new one coming out?
For cause, each of the books pulls a section or a provision out of the bankruptcy code or the legislative history, and that's the title. And then the title will have something to do with that going on in under the bankruptcy code for 3J to deal with, and something to do with the social issue that's going on in the case. So one of the books is named Unfair Discrimination. That's a provision right out of the Chapter 11. But it gives me a chance to have the storyline be something about discrimination.
It's one of the common themes I've found in talking to lawyers turned writers, myself included, is that we do have a desire to use that mechanism or that medium to talk about social issues
Yeah.
that we were kind of not allowed to talk about too much while we practiced because of
Yeah. I
privilege and
mean,
other issues. We were
right.
kind of stifled there. And so when you finally get a chance to write a book about something, lawyers tend to want to make some social comments. That's what I think makes the book so great when I read
Yeah.
books by ex-lawyers. But so you read a book by Grisham is a very different kind of a book to read than a book by Ludlum. Ludlum is just like let's kill everybody and have a good time, and it's a great book. I mean, I love reading, but it's a very different kind of a book than you read Thoreau or Grisham or lawyers like yourself. So it's a common theme I find interesting about lawyers who sort of come out of their shell after practicing and want to make some really important statements that they're well equipped to make because of what they've experienced in their careers. One of the expressions you used that I picked up was the line writing the legal thriller from a practice to a plot. What did you mean by that?
Um, I like I like my thrillers to be authentic. So the practice part, of course, when you're practicing, everything you're doing is real. It's happening, and there's real. In my world, there was real money at issue, and somebody may go out of business, and jobs will be lost, and all of those pieces of it, and the courtroom scene. I want to be authentic. I don't want to overload the reader with, a 25-page brief about something in the bankruptcy code. But when they're in court and there's testimony being given, which my books have a fair amount of, I want that to be authentic. I want to be able to tell the story through the testimony, just like the judge is hearing the story through the testimony. So I want that part so I can draw on my legal career to make sure that what I'm doing is accurate but authentic as well. And that leads to the plot line. How can I make it all authentic and have an interesting plot at the same time? Because until I started doing this, nobody would have thought bankruptcy would have generated, 5 novels at all. Um, and the plot, that part is different than practice. Clients bring you their plot, and that's the case. I make that up in the book, but I want to do that in a way that I want to do that in such a way that no one ever posts a review on Amazon saying, I'm a bankruptcy lawyer and that's just dead wrong, and here's why.
Right.
I don't want that to happen. And at times I'm not as good as I should be in balancing the law part, um, for the non-lawyer reader, overloading them.
It's interesting. I had as a guest a lawyer who had turned to author, and his first three books were nonfiction about cases that had happened and whatever, like a Truman Capote in cold blood
Right.
kind of narrative. And then he decided to go into fictional, his fourth book, and he talked about how much more difficult it was because he wanted to keep the discipline of the lawyering in the book, that would continue to be accurate, but he had to layer on that total creativity, where he was just creating a plot out of thin air and found that to be a lot more difficult than writing the historical nonfiction kind of stuff he
Yeah.
wrote first. I thought that was an interesting comment because I never wrote historical nonfiction as you don't. You do the thriller kind of stuff that so many authors do, and it's really hard to balance what the reader's going to like and what you want to make sure they understand from a technical standpoint. Because you're right, the last thing you want is someone who knows what they're talking about to leave a review that you got something wrong. And
Right.
that is that is the worst kind of review to get. And you may be the only person who knows that, and others don't care, but you care because that's sort
Right,
of
right.
a criticism of you.
And I don't get rebuttal on Amazon,
Yeah,
or Barnes and Noble for reviews. So yeah, the review is posted for all the world to see, which is fine. I, I should add that this whole interest in being authentic comes from um, me not wanting to watch any lawyer show on TV. So in 48 minutes plus commercials, an entire case is investigated and tried to conclusion. And this stuff that happens that makes me think no lawyer could ever have written that could never happen in a courtroom, what just happened. And so I scream to my wife, I can't watch this, and I leave the room. And it's probably that experience that has led me to want to make sure that my courtroom scenes are what really happens in the courtroom.
It's funny. You got up and left. In my case, my wife tells me to leave because I sit there going, "That could never happen.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
ridiculous. That could never happen."
yeah,
And
I
so
ruined the
I'm
show. Right.
spoiling the show for her. So she says,
Yes.
"Get
Yeah.
out. Let me watch the show." So
Yeah.
so it's a similar
Yeah.
experience. So when you're writing a book that you want to have the authenticity in, but you also want to have the creativity be part of the attraction to the readers, how do you deal with, or do you have a sense of how one should deal with the professional ethics and justice and that kind of thing, from the real world perspective as opposed to the creative direction?
Um, 3J stretches past the finish line, to use a line from the newest book that'll come, more often than not, and is always faced with the ethical question of, how far am I going to go step over this line? And if so, how far over the line am I going to go? And she let's see if this would give away the latest book. Yeah, I probably shouldn't say
No
what.
spoiler alert. No spoiler
Yeah, no
alert.
spoiler alert. But in prior books, for example, she's been faced with the problem of, is she going to authorize a computer hack, which is a felony, and is she going to have somebody do that so she can gather information to help, in her case, kind of thing. And I think that's probably not a spoiler alert because nobody knows what the information is or what
Right,
happens
right.
if she authorizes it. And so I have this flawed protagonist, and I like to say that I don't really have good guys. I have bad good guys. I have good bad guys, and occasionally I have a bad guy. But most of the characters aren't purely good or bad, including the recurring mobster that appears in the books. And I think that I like that, and that's my way of kind of presenting ethical problems for 3J, the protagonist.
No, it's interesting in that context. One of my ongoing characters, for example, is an FBI profiler who um, who is very flawed. And I think that's what brings authenticity to books is when your main character is a flawed character.
Right.
I often look at some of the other popular books that are out there, and it's like James Bond was never flawed. I mean, he was just like a perfect guy. So I mean, it would be interesting to see him a little more flawed in the context as some of the movies did later on. When they produced movies that Ian Fleming never wrote, he became a more flawed character and more believable character. So I love the idea that you have the flaws in there and have them have to make those kinds of tough decisions because I think in many ways that's what brings a reader in because they're flawed, and
Yeah.
they want to sort of experience that kind of thing.
I think that's why, for example, Spider-Man has been such a popular, wild success for Marvel over the decades, because the main character, Peter Parker, Queen's kid like me, terribly flawed, terribly self-doubting at all times, and yet, he's got these superpowers and he's, saves the world at the end of every comic book. So, um, I, I guess I would just say that I am very flawed myself, still learning what those flaws are. And again, the characters should be authentic, and there just really aren't too many original James Bond kind of people in the real world.
No, there are not. There are not. In fact, they're wannabes, but they're very, very
Oh
few.
yeah,
So tell me, I mean, were you a Yankees or a Mets fan? Which one was it when you
Mets.
go?
Man, my dad was a Brooklyn kid, and
Ah,
so the big Dodgers fan, and it was almost a crime to have the Yankees on TV. I mean, I think he would have illuminated Channel 11 on our TV, which was the Yankees channel. If he
WPIX,
could have
yeah.
done. So we were all WOR Mets people through the terrible years. My grandfather took me to the Polo Grounds their first year in '62 to see them, which was, historically wonderful, but they were terrible. It's just a really bad baseball team.
Well, it's funny when I was growing up, I was an Army brat, as I may have mentioned to you in prior discussions, and we only moved to the United States when I was 11 years old, and I needed to have a team when we moved to New Jersey. And I looked at the Yankees and I said, boy, there's a lot of numbers there that I got to learn and history. I think I'll go with this new team, this Mets, even though they stink. And I've been a Mets fan ever since. And
Oh, okay, there
and
you go.
and we, we lament about them and but they are what they are and we remain loyal to them no matter what. So
Yeah, and
um,
that went away when we moved to Kansas City for good because we got to Kansas City during the George Brett
oh,
prime
sure, the
time,
Royals, yeah.
and he was flirting with 400, and we were going nightly out to the stadium and just buying tickets at the up in the nosebleed seats just to be able to see history being made if he could have batted 400. So we actually became hook, line, and sinker Royals fans, and I couldn't tell you who's on the Mets anymore after my era ended there. And then we moved out here to Denver, and I'm now in the city with another historically bad team that was flirting with losing 120 games again this year.
Right. Right. You must have been you must be lamenting about the Chiefs right now as well.
Yeah, it's funny when my friend opened an office here, that's how we got out to Denver. They wanted people to populate it, and I was happy to because it's a great city and it's right on the edge of the mountains. And I come out here, I start meeting clients, and the very first thing they ask you at lunch is Chiefs or Broncos. And my mobile phone is a Kansas City area code exchange, and so I had to start telling people that I really wasn't a football fan, and kind of lying. But
It's so I mean, having come from the New York metropolitan area like yourself, I mean, sports is sort of such a central thing. And
it
you'll
is.
often meet people who don't have teams in their geographic center. And it's like, why are you so concerned about a football team or a baseball team?
Yeah.
Whatever. They don't sort of have the same kind of crazy loyalties that people have from those metropolitan areas. It's an interesting aspect, I think, of just geographic relocation and location. But okay, so let me conclude here and ask you the impossible question that in 10 or so seconds, tell me what you would tell a lawyer facing a point in his or her career where she needs to make a change or wants to make a change. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I don't tend to give out advice. I think what I've concluded is it's incredibly a personal decision and everybody's different. There's no cookie cutter answer. When I speak, which I do regularly and I love to, and I talk about the career change, I do get asked that by people, and I almost feel like I'm in a counselor's session with them. But I don't have the skill set to tell somebody, okay, it's time for you to move on. Here's what you can do. Here's what I would focus on if I was you. I can tell them what I did and how I did it. But I really don't think that I'm capable of telling somebody in the midst of the thought process of whether I'm going to stay a lawyer for 20 more years or move on to something else, other than to just tell them, which I do regularly as well, that I firmly believe that there isn't just one thing that you can do in your life. Humans aren't built that way. Humans can do many things, and you just have to be ready to open up yourself to the possibility of things you could do and see if any of those are things that would interest you for the next, season of your life.
That couldn't be a better answer than I could have hoped for. So
Okay.
thank you very much, Mark, for being on the show. Great
Yeah, thank
stuff. I'm sorry you're not a Mets fan anymore, but I'll forgive you
you.
for that. And wish you the best. And I hope all the listeners and the viewers, get that new book out. What's the title of it again?
The new one that comes out in a couple of months is For Cause.
So definitely, get four cause, read the other ones, and if you really want to have an enjoyable listen, because I did the audio book on it is what makes me me. It's the perfect way for a 6 hour drive to listen to Mark's story. It's hilarious and fun and really profound. So I
Thank you.
encourage my listeners and readers and viewers to do that. So thank you again, Mark, and
Thank you.
and we'll hope to hook up sometime in the future. Be well.
You too.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.